Hi, everybody. My name is Keith Blackmore. I'm one of the producers with the Spark Animation Festival. Well, the quotation, if I have seen further than others, it is by standing upon the shoulders of giants, relates to Bob Kurtz, especially considering his long influential career in animation and his contributions to both the art and the industry of animation. He has done everything. There's no shortage of things he hasn't done. And so it is my deep pleasure to welcome today that animation giant, Bob Kurtz, as we go deep into his career and learn all about it. Bob, welcome.
Well, thank you. And is my head filling the screen? That's a very good
Yeah, that
introduction.
helium just.
Wow. Yeah, it's like whoa, whoa, ooh, it's different.
Well, you have had a long, varied career. Um, I, what first drew you into the field of animation? How did you get started?
Um, well, it's not a quick story, but
Is it
one
is
of
it what
the
is it a once upon a time story?
and I hope not, it's damn near at 2 years old. Um, I got a hold of a pencil and I started drawing, filling tablets, doing stuff. So I always drew for myself. Never took any art lessons. I just loved drawing, and it was just a joy to do it. I wasn't any good. I just liked drawing. Um, when you're a senior in high school, they give you an aptitude test, what you would, what you could do. And I kept thinking because I'm like a talking machine. So I thought I might be a lawyer or something, save the world and that. And I took the test and I was really high in art.
Hmm.
And I thought, great, because I loved animation. I saw it when I was a kid. Before I even got to art school, I knew about UPA, United Productions of America, which was um, a much more modern approach. As opposed to an animation-driven media, it was a design-driven
Right.
and
Yeah.
different stories and stuff. And I liked it. Just was so different than anything else. But I loved Warner Brothers, cartoons. I loved Disney. I loved all that stuff. But UPA really got to me. So I used to, I'm like 18 years old. I would call up the theater because you could see, what was coming the next week at a motion picture house. And I'd asked him what the animated short was. Usually that man ended up talking to a girl who doesn't know what the hell. And I didn't want to go see Woody Woodpecker. I didn't know where I could see UPA. So I called constantly and I would find out where they were playing and I would see the films. So I thought I and I always liked making people laugh, so I thought I'd be a gag cartoonist or something. I wanted to do comedy. And so I went to junior college, El Camino JC in Los Angeles. And I thought, oh, well, they know a lot about art. Of course, you go to junior college. So here I am. I'm not very good, but I have a passion. Well, I had three instructors. Two of them told me I would never be an artist. Even one gave me a choice of a D and an F. I said, I'll take the D. And the third never said anything to me. So I immediately had been put down by teachers who I thought knew what it was. But still, I thought, I would like to, I'd like to do it. So and I got married very early. Again, I was like 20 years old and had gone back to junior college. And I decided to take a summer class just as a test from a teacher who told me I'd never be an artist. And I wasn't dumb. I'm not the smartest, but I wasn't dumb. I decided, because I didn't know anything, the way they were teaching, I decided to study the teacher, not the art. I
Oh.
knew what he wanted. I
Hmm.
gave him what he wanted. I got an A. He said, "What happened to you?" I didn't answer. So I started going around the art schools, and I was here. I Now I had a child. I was working in just terrible labor, kind of, drill press operator, timekeeper. Oh, just, you know, oh, just kill me. It's like a way to die. You go to work and you die for as many hours. It was horrible.
Yeah.
And so I looked up and I saw Art Center, nice and slick, and I went there and went, oh boy, I'd like to be able to do hubcaps like that. Again, not being able to do anything. Uh, and I went and I found this great art school, or it found me, Chenard Art Institute.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting school. It promised you they would help you become an artist. It never promised you a job. Which is Art Center. Boom, you went right to Detroit, or you went. I mean, they place people. Chenard didn't even know how to place people.
Okay.
So I go there with my portfolio, and my portfolio has life drawings with no facial features. The hands are smudged. There are no toes on the feet. I mean, it's like, there's something laying there. And they were just awful. And I go there, and in the patio, they had, I went through, it was before school started. So it's dark, the rooms are dark, and you go out into the lit patio, and this older woman was sitting there, and because I'd had an appointment, and she said, "I'm glad to meet you." And it's Mrs. Chenard, the founder of the school. I go, wow. So I sit down, and in this kind of, September, the light is really nice. I'm I'm talking to her, and she's this really sweet person. I decided to tell her everything. I said, "I don't know if I could be an artist because I'm dyslexic."
Hmm.
And she says, "Uh-huh." And I said, "And I'm colorblind," which, by the way, most of my studios still doesn't know I'm colorblind. I wrote a book where I was going to reveal it, but I will reveal it to you guys. Um, um, and I'll tell you more about being colorblind. And
Okay.
she says, "Take a lot of drawing." And she accepted me.
Hmm.
And it was a school where great teachers, I mean, amazing teachers, Don Graham, Bill Moore, these are all legendary.
Yeah.
And the teachers didn't agree with each other. And I always thought there was something wrong in schools where all the teachers had the same kind of philosophy, because the basic premise of most of the school is that the student can teach himself if given the chance and given the opening. You don't just lay down a bunch of principles and here, go run with it. It's like, well, you do that in a correspondence school. But when you have good students and good teachers and good competition, wow, you learn so fast. And soon I was on scholarship, and they and Shadar was sending me off to jobs, and people want to come and get cheap talent, so I was doing that. And I worked. I was very intense because I had a daughter, a little baby daughter,
Right.
and if I didn't get this, it was going to be a living death of working at something I hated. And along the lines, because they had an animation program, I thought, oh boy, I'd love, to be in animation. And again, it's getting a long story, but what happens is you have to. Teehee, the great Teehee, was teaching animation design, and you had to have 2 years of drawing and design to take them. So you couldn't take them to your third year. I decided, because I was very heavy on just drawing and design. I was a fine arts major. There was a guy named Stan Wilkins who taught the pre class. So what happens is you take him on the third year, you get Teehee on the fourth.
Wow.
Uh, I took him in the summer, and I knew I was going to ace it. I was prepared as dessert. And Stan said, um, I'm skipping you to Teehee. I
Yeah.
didn't have to take it from him. I love being in Teehee's class, and we hit it off. And Teehee asked me to join him at Disney on a new project. So out of school, I was offered two jobs, another one from Disney and Teehee. So I went to work at Disney on the third floor with Walt, doing white on white paper sculpture and designing, and he wanted me to direct the film. So I started as a boy storyboard director at $75 a week.
What year was
But
that? When was that you graduated?
1959. Whoa, way back.
Just after Sleeping
And
Beauty.
and that's low money. And I
Yeah.
said, T, can I get any more? That was union pay. The union had a category for
Yeah.
director, apprentice director, which is stupid. Uh, and as that, I was supposed to be an apprentice director for 2 years, and then I could be a director. There's no such thing, because either somebody lets you be a director or not. I started directing about I think 5 6 years later. I was asked to direct. I didn't direct after that. I became a writer, designer. So that's how I found my way. But it was for any students looking at out there, looking, I mean, wondering, the I had a passion.
Yeah.
I didn't have the ability, but through passion, and you get, you know, uh, I don't know what to say. Everything was new to me, so
Plus
I
you had
kept. Yeah, go ahead.
plus you have dyslexia. Plus you're colorblind, but you have this enthusiasm. But you felt maybe because of ego or fact you don't have the ability, so that drives you to go even harder.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah. I mean the idea. I taught, not taught at various schools. I never give up on a student. I will never tell a student he
mm,
can't make it. Guess why?
mm, mm,
But I don't think it's my choice to do it, because everybody has a different learning curve.
right,
I had um um I'm trying to just blanked out on this first name, Bill Moore, the great design instructor, and he had the prismatic light theory, and it's so solid. It's based on light, the prism, ultra red, ultraviolet to infrared.
right,
And I was so trained, I trained so hard on color theory that when I got in the business, only Teehee knew. And then later, my co-designer, about 5 years after he was working with me, I told him he had no idea. And
really,
how it worked is I had all my paints labeled so that when you're colorblind, um, there are these like maroon and chartreuse.
mhm,
Maroon looks black, chartreuse looks yellow. But if I knew it was chartreuse, I know how to use it. And so a lot of the Kurtz and Friends color palettes uh, are mine. And my color models didn't know. Um, you know, uh, I started writing a book a couple of years ago, and I thought I might as well tell somebody. They're
So
most of the
you
people
were you
in the
you when you said
industry
you
do not
labeled them,
know.
how did you label them? With a name or a number, or you knew?
Well, I just want to, in other words, you can have a watercolor set
Yeah,
that's numbered. There's
yeah,
labeled.
but it's still
Sometimes they come unlabeled,
yeah.
so I label them. I labeled my paint tubes, my jars of paint. I knew what they were. Now, basically it's only very few colors that I don't see correctly.
Yeah.
Uh, and like, and it's pretty funny because a pink is a very, very light pink and white are very similar.
Mm.
So I learned to talk in code. I taught color in class without ever mentioning the name of the color, the hue. I mean, it's because I knew I might, get crossed up. I go to the lab and I have a white background. And
Wow.
so again, I mean, it's like trying always being clever. I would tell the timer, is that as white as we can get? And he says, no, I can get that pink out. I didn't know if there was pink there. I had ways of
But your
asking.
mind,
Yeah.
you could see it in your
Now,
mind.
but now the reason I did that is if a client, if somebody knows I'm colorblind, they're not going to trust me
No.
on the
Oh, no.
color. They're going to question. They're going to keep saying, "Hold up a thing. What color is this?
I mean, am I going to
What is,
take it?
what is this? I would have to go through some kind of test. And yet, if they didn't know,
Right?
we were doing all this uh, unique stuff, and it's all color theory.
Yeah.
What you do is you take a weakness, it's definitely a weakness, and turn it into a strength
Right.
by really learning color theory. And it's involved, but once you understand it's light, so
Yeah.
for instance, the primary colors in the prismatic color theory, light theory, are um, they're, let's see, green, vermilion, and violet.
Right. Yeah.
Those are the primaries.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
right.
what's really strange, if you're working with colored gels, by crossing them, you can make yellow.
Yeah.
Now, when you're working with pigments, you know it's different. But since you know it by light, like when I was, doing color transfers, I understood why red was so hard to get because it's a very small band and blue is a big band. In other words, it's by not learning that yellow is a primary and really understanding what they are, uh, and understanding that color is, I mean, a simple thing is uh, an apple is not red.
Yeah.
It absorbs all light except red and bounces it back. I mean, it's kind of like, why not know what color is?
But it's just amazing because I'm thinking like, okay, well, if it was offered on a program, oh, come sign up for color theory with Bob Kurtz, who's colorblind. It's like nobody is going to be signing up.
Oh
But
yeah,
as you
yeah, but
said, but you knew it and you found a way around it. Now, we're talking about how you were in the industry and you're utilizing, turning your weaknesses into strengths, and this gets you into Disney, but and you're working through the 60s now into the 70s. In the 70s, you start your own. What made you decide to start your own studio? Kurtz and
I
Company.
want to tell you one thing which is funny.
Yeah, please.
I designed the original album, The Chipmunks, and the other things. And working on the show, I was a writer, and there were four writers. He had come and joined because I ended up working with T for 2 more years.
Right.
A great writer, Cal Howard, who also became a mentor, and Dick Shaw. And we had our desks up to each other while we're writing. Only one of us could spell T, and it's notorious. The gag man, which I'm part of, can't spell, and it was hysterical all through while we're doing stuff. We're asking T, how do you spell this? How do you spell that? So it was all that. I mean, it's funny. Another weakness, but when you get in, I don't know what it is. You get into comedy, and a lot of bad spellers. I'm because of the dyslexic. I'm a very good reader. I don't know why,
Enjoy.
but I move letters around when I go to spell. So anyway, what is your question again?
Well, first off, I got to say, if I heard that if I had to hire Bob Kurtz as a colorblind, I said that's a red flag.
Yeah, yeah, it's a red or a violet flag, depending on
Or a
what I can
violet flag,
see.
but he wouldn't know either way.
Yeah,
Anyway, you obviously had a few challenges that you
yeah. Well, look
faced.
at all behind me, all
Yeah,
this stuff. That's my color,
there you
and
go.
and pretty much maybe 70, 80% on my reel uh, is my color design.
Well,
Uh, and I love working with color. Uh, it's
it's amazing.
it's like there are other colorblind artists who
Yeah,
paint. It's
yeah,
kind of interesting, and there one or two, not very many, or they don't admit it in animation.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
usually they're
Well, it's
animators or
again,
something.
like I said, it's a red flag for everybody.
Yeah, that's right. Or yeah.
Yeah. We mentioned that we're standing on the shoulders of a giant, you being the giant, but it sounds like you were trained by giants. I mean, look at
Oh
I mean,
yes.
Bill Moore, Stan Perkins, T. He, amongst then you're at the studio itself with all those still nine old men are still there
Oh
at
well,
Disney that period of time.
I got to study in Mark Davis class. He taught life drawing.
Amazing. Yeah,
Don Graham, the great Don Graham,
yeah,
composition. Uh, I studied with him, and then Mark became a mentor, and we became very, very close friends, and we were neighbors and all that. And there were, when I was at Disney, I was in the same wing with Bill Pete, so we
oh
hung
wow.
out. So I kept hanging out with. I looked okay when I was 20. I looked 15. So by the time I was like 25 working, I looked about 19 years old. So people thought that I was really bright because look at that young kid doing this. I wasn't
He's a
that young.
prodigy. It's a prodigy. Yeah.
I don't look that young now, but at one time. But I got to work, talk, experience with the nine old men, and
Yeah.
so many people along the way, became close with Chuck Jones. Just a lot of uh people who share your dream because the professionals welcome young talent. At least
Yes.
in when I was coming up, I right now it's a little more of a business and it's more do your thing, get out. But it wasn't as crowded, and so there's a little more time for interchange.
Yeah.
Though I see a lot of people all the time, and I'm giving advice and stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
and giving lectures. Okay, now
So,
what
next
was the
question. Okay,
question?
so what motivated you then to start your own studio? You're working there, so now you're leaving in the
Oh,
mid 70s. What was that vision that you had when you first launched it? You obviously had a
I
vision and thought, I can do something on my own. I'll go across the street, rent a space, and do something. What was that?
it's not like that.
No?
Um, I ran out of people to work for.
Oh,
Uh, I was um, I had done a lot of freelance uh, in the 60s going into the 70s where I worked at a lot of studios. Then I worked at a studio called Film Fair, and I had written and directed a live action film that won a lot of awards. And the owner didn't want me to do any more live action films because he wanted me as an animation person. And so he wanted to put me on a retainer. And I didn't like being limited, even though I didn't make live action films after that, other than sometimes, a combination. So I quit. And after I quit, I looked around because every producer, almost every producer I worked for, was a bit crazy, nutty. They weren't necessarily, uh, like I said, they didn't work in the business. They want to own a business.
hmm.
And there was always the separation between who they employed and them as the employer, the employee, which I don't like that relationship.
Yeah.
But I quit. And then I looked around because I wanted to see, okay, who next would I like to work for? I couldn't, there was nobody that I wanted to work for.
Mm.
There was nothing out there that invited me that I felt I could grow. And I thought, ah, why don't I just start a company? I had no idea other than I put out feelers to other companies if they want to go in partnerships because I had no money or anything. And I got 6 offers and I took one, which I thought was safe. And of course, it's the wrong one. And I had a partnership with a company called Wakeford Orloff for 2 years. And I ended up in litigation to get my money out of it. So I started all over again in 1974. And uh, when I started, my goal was I I I wanted, I don't know, I'm trying the best way without making it a big ego thing. I
Mm.
wanted to do something that people hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
I thought that's how you grow. My mentors, talk. They always, when I talk to them, they encourage me. And the idea is maybe we should do something we haven't seen before.
Mm.
Why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? Why don't we bring illustrators into animation who've never have done that? Why don't we try, I don't know, let's start, let's make it a little bit of a failure involved in if, like we're doing something that nobody's done before.
Yeah.
And what it turned out to be is the company, for most of its productions, was we kept trying to do something that hadn't been done before.
Mm.
We didn't want to copy. So, like if, people wanted to do Tony the Tiger or Charlie the Tuna, we didn't do it
Mm. Yeah.
because it's already done. They would come and offer. I didn't do it. If Leo Burnett, the agency in Chicago, had a new breakfast, we would work on it, the first one. And then we
Right.
didn't do it.
Right.
Um, there was, I had a wonderful group of just amazing talent that I surrounded myself with.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, just great, great talent in all case. And really good animators. And we had some of the first women animators in particularly in commercial animation at that time. We did commercials because um, motion picture had kind of gone really dead, the animated feature, and the most experimental animation being done was in commercials.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
right. At
it
that
was the
period of time.
most challenging. And so I chose to go there.
Yeah.
Later, we did specials and we did public service spots and we do other things. But the reason we got in, and it's probably hard for anybody now to think about, man, what they do in commercials, just, there's
Mm.
no animation that's going to motivate you. I think once every 2 years, I might see something that goes, wow.
Yeah.
But
No. Right. Just to remind our audience, like that, being back in the '70s, to work in animation, you had pretty much only two choices: Disney or Ralph Bakshi, or maybe Saturday morning cartoons. And even that
yeah,
was dying out, right? It wasn't
yeah,
as big. And all those theatrical cartoons, you talked about UPA and Warner's and that, and the shorts of Disney, they were done by the
yeah.
'70s.
Nobody was cutting new ground,
No, no, there was
you
nothing
know.
new and exciting. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
I got, I got such good education at Chenard. Uh, and it was like, let's try this, let's try that,
yeah,
let's do this and again, I basically deal in comedy, and I figured out why. Because basically, I need a response. As my daughter says, I'm needy. Uh, and through comedy, if your film's working. They
E-
laugh,
immediately.
and it's a need to touch people. You know, I'm
Yeah,
an only child, and I was a talking machine, big surprise, and I think it's all from being alone and then wanting that, that, I mean, it's such a great feeling to sit in an audience and you do a film title and the audience laughs and you've done some stuff. And now when I go to art schools and colleges and I show my films, and this is currently, they're still laughing.
Yeah.
And I go, because I don't trust when the communication will stop, you know,
Yeah.
where the kind of stuff I do uh, will a new audience like it, because uh, new audiences have, young people have, there's something new and something old,
Yeah.
like uh, I spoke at Art Center. And one of the students asked me, he said, "What do you suggest I do, as a student? What would you suggest?" And I said, "Get a life." And and then I explained it, about go out and see the world, observe it. Don't be like your fellow student. There's all, in other words,
Yeah.
you have to find out who you are. And who you are, you're not a cult. You're not that room. You are an individual. And what happens is go find out what pleases you or what is your interest, and go out and see people and draw and study and talk and try new things. An example, when I was a student, I know, but we had libraries that you could rent LPs, records. That's long playing records.
Even film.
I would go to
You
the
can rent
library.
film. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I did that too. I also ran
Yeah.
a film program at
Mm.
Chenard, and I would go down to the library, get the films from the National Film Board, and run them. And I think there was like 25 cents, and you brought your lunch. And I showed the films that I wanted to see. I was in charge of showing films I wanted. And of course, that's how you do it. So a lot of Norman McLaren that I'd only seen, and I
Right.
just. But I was going to say what I did is I would buy. I mean, not buy. I would rent, or take out whatever it is, 2 or 3 albums of things I didn't know, like, music from, Tibet, uh,
Mm.
um,
Mm.
certain parts of Africa,
Mm.
anything I didn't know, and I would play it because I wanted to know about it.
Yeah.
And I kept doing that. I mean, I loved jazz. I always loved music, but I went into listening to music I had from all these countries. It was so different, and
Interesting.
it's because I was curious. So I tell get a life, be curious, and afterwards, and I knew I was going to get in trouble uh, because I was surrounded like 20 students or more, and they said our teacher won't say that. And I thought, yeah, of course I'm gonna go question everything, get a life, uh,
But
you know,
but to that point, like that aspect of learn something new and something old, and be
yes,
curious. It's that, but what comes out is that your films or your art, they find that they have their voice,
yeah,
right?
well,
Right?
yeah, it's yes, there's like, there's
Because
a
they often
layer,
think, yeah. I was gonna say they often think they got to be some way, but they find that they're individual. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Bob.
well, I'll tell you, I believe in the subconscious power of the subconscious mind, meaning there's a layer down.
Mhm.
So often what you have to do is get the bad stuff out of the way.
Right.
Includes drawings. When you have an idea, write it down and then keep going and keep going. And then suddenly you'll hit something that's really, really good. But it's the first thing isn't all not necessarily. It can be. It may not be the best answer because you haven't really thought about it, And so it's to break down an assignment is, you can have assets and limitations. You write down what has it got going for it, and what's against it so that you understand what the problem is. Um, I mean, I love reading books on creativity, particularly in other areas, how people come up with ideas and how often when you plant it in your subconscious and then, say like on Thursday, I'm going to have an answer to this problem, and you're taking a shower, suddenly here's this answer. How
Yeah.
many solutions come in the bathroom, because you're relaxed. Suddenly something goes flying up.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
the
You're sleeping and napping. Yeah.
the area of creativity is fascinating
Yeah.
in terms of you add one element that you're working with or one paint, or you'll add something else that you haven't done before. Uh, the searching, almost everybody will know when they hit it,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Let's go back to your studio days. Your why
Yeah.
you told us about why you formed it and your thoughts on creativity and such. But you worked in commercials and title sequences and shorts. Maybe we can examine it more specifically. Some of those major brands and major commercials that you've done. Because you worked with Coca-Cola, Nike, Toyota, AT&T, United Airlines. Is there any particular partnership that stood out to you, or a challenge that you had in working with
Well,
them?
are you thinking commercial or
Yeah, commercials.
titles?
Let's talk about commercials, then we'll go to then we can examine the titles. Title
Okay.
sequences for features. Yeah.
I don't I don't know. Um there's so many I have stories, but when I did Chevron, um we I was in San Francisco picking up a job on Levi's, which was the hot thing if you could get that. So I was with the agency and picking up a job there where I got a call uh, from another agency that knew I was there. And it was really funny because they had called down, and my producer said, "Well, he's in San Francisco." So, and it was so funny in the middle of the meeting. It was like I can't remember what the agency was for Levi's, but it was BBD&O. They said there's a call from BBD&O for Bob. So it's going. So they all looked at me, and I go, "Take this," and they said, "Can you see us? When's your flight out?" And I said, "Well, I'm catching blah blah. Yeah, I can see you." So it made me look really important, to be called in the middle of the meeting by that. So I go to to that agency, and they play a radio spot,
Hmm.
and it's about we don't have that many more dinosaurs. It's a very charming radio spot, and they said, "Could this be animation?" And I
Hmm.
said, "Yeah, because it had a flow to it." So I had this idea, and my co-designer Robert Palouse, we wanted to do metamorphic animation. We could never get anybody to buy it. Winsor McKay in 1906 was doing
Yeah.
metamorphic, but I was just really excited about metamorphic. And I wanted to do where the camera moves up and down. We would draw, and we
Hmm.
would not keep it from one viewpoint, but move around. So we decided that we really wanted to do this spot. So what we did, we never did it before, never did it since. We made a storyboard, and they're miniature cells where we actually painted on cells the complete storyboard because we wanted to sell this. And so, and it's like this, we don't do slick boards normally. This was super slick. We sent it off, never heard anything for 3 months. We figured it's dead. Uh, then what happened is the head of Chevron said to the agency, "Where's that storyboard you were going to show me?" The agency had gotten scared of the storyboard and didn't show it.
Oh.
So they showed it. The guy, his name is Hammerman, loved it, and he said, "I want it, and I want it in 2 weeks." It was like it takes 10 to 12 weeks to do a film. So we got what we wanted with no time. So it was so specific. So we're laying out, and I'm handing out. It's like a game where when I had six animators, and no one knows how they hook up, and we're going crazy, and my crew is we're staying. We don't go home. We sleep overnight and stuff. As we get started, they said stop. It's that fossil fuel doesn't just come from fossils; it also comes from flora. And a geologist had said this, and I said, no problem. And I had a flower come up and punch it, the dinosaur in the nose. They said, same day, fine. So off we go again.
Oh,
So we somehow, man, we just died. No one knows it. I mean, it's an impossible day. We made it, and it changed the vision for Chevron.
yeah,
Because at that time I didn't know if I, my co-designer, didn't know if we even wanted to work for Chevron because they had caused the Santa Barbara oil spills at that time. Earth Day was created because of what Chevron had done. And so I, the creative director from the agency, we all donated to energy or whatever, save
yeah,
the planet thing.
yeah,
And the message was really, really a good message because Chevron got accolades from their natural enemies, the Federal Energy Commission and the Sierra Club, told them what a great job they were doing. So
well,
we then,
I still remember that. I mean, that's how I associate oil. It's with these dead dinosaurs and fossils, and it's your
yeah,
commercial.
well, that commercial, I'm told all the time,
Yeah,
particularly that one, but that first year, so many people have come up to me and said, that's why I got an animation. And I think it was, they had never seen this kind of fun,
yeah,
but we were a moving camera, metamorphic, full
yeah.
of surprises, which is what I'd like to do is films with surprise. And I'm constantly, I mean, I don't know how many times it makes me feel good that people join the circus, to make a change, you know?
You're the
I mean,
ringleader. You're the,
you know,
you're the head of the
uh,
cartel.
yeah. The next year, I go up by myself in a room full of executives in a dark room, and Hammerman's at the end, and he says to me, uh, I don't want I don't want you to feel that you have take any credit for that campaign. I did it myself. He told me, and I go, so at that point, I said, fine. And I said, by the way, you own the film. We own the images. You have to you have to pay us when you do billboards and other things. We'll do it at the going rate. He said he yelled some obscenities at me, and he said I can get somebody else to do this. And they all walked out of the room, leaving me there. About 2 weeks later, we signed up the campaign and they gave us what we wanted, which is when it appeared in San Francisco billboards and all that, we did the work because we didn't want somebody copying our work. We wanted to do it. We wanted to enjoy the benefits of the
Yeah, of
associated images that were being made. And
course.
we just did it for, there's a graphic handbook which will tell you the prices it goes for. We never charged more, just
Yeah,
the going rate. What we want to do is keep the message on message, and we can draw it better than anybody else because we're not copying, it's what we
sure,
do.
exactly.
So that's one, because
We,
it created such a um it seemed to make a difference at the time.
yeah.
I know it's been by many called the greatest oil gas commercial, which I don't know if that's really a compliment,
Well,
but
well, in a
what we
sense, I guess
did,
it's like if the tobacco industry created something to highlight,
no,
the goodness of having a smoke,
yeah,
that's what the Chevron was doing Really?
Yeah, well, I've always had this thing. I did not do any cigarette commercials or cigar commercials. I
No.
refuse. And I did 22 years of anti-smoking for the state of California,
Mm.
which was sold free, or given free to the United States and into Europe, where they ran. So, because uh, it was a producer I knew, and he said, "We have no money. We have very little money," and it was something I believed in,
Hmm.
uh, because my dad was a smoker and died of lung cancer,
Mm.
and so it was it was something. eh,
Personal too.
you never know what effect, but it's something, and the whole studio believed it. And what's funny
Hmm.
about that is, okay, to make it kind of universal, I did like a two-head high character with a big nose, and it's like he's wearing pajamas, and that's our character. And about 15 years into the spot, they decided to test it. It's always funny when people decide to test it. But what they did, and they called me up, the Department of Health of the state of California, and they said, we took in different groups, Black, Hispanic, Asian, whatever. Each group thought it was addressed to them. I found that fascinating.
Interesting.
I wouldn't have known that.
Yeah.
It's just, this guy has no color, and he's big nose and
Right.
whatever.
Right.
And it's fascinating what if I think the character was based on a character who wants to smoke but doesn't know how. I mean, he wants to stop smoking, I'm sorry, and doesn't know how. And there's a truth to that. And I think based on truth,
Mm.
it didn't matter about the design.
Yeah. Now, your studio, obviously, you've done hundreds of commercials. Is
Yeah,
the Chevron obviously stands out? Is there any others that would stand out as your favorite?
Kitty
Or
Salmon.
oh yeah, why?
Kitty, I love Kitty Salmon. That was early on, and a guy named John Welder, who ended up writing more Simpsons scripts, but he was driving a cab, and this agent, there was a real hot agency in Chicago, and they hired him, and he just is just a strange mind. You, sir, being a cat, would do anything to get your paws on some salmon. So I love, I had done some commercials for them before they'd won some awards. So they came right back with, that, and it had no storyboard, had nothing. He just had these crazy, the dialogue. So I uh, I sat down. What I normally did in the company is, because I'm a designer, I don't automatically get the job.
Mm.
It's always a competition with my other designers. So at that time, I only had one other designer. So we draw lots of cats, and then we usually confuse our clients. I'd send in 25 cats. He'd send in 25 cats. So we have 50 cats that we say you choose, and
Right.
there was
Yeah.
whoever chooses, they lay out the film. I direct everything. So I never lose. So we sent it, and uh, the creative director said, not dumb enough, the cat. And so we go back and start redrawing. And I'm drawing and I'm drawing. And then suddenly I do this drawing and I realize it's me. I'm drawing myself as a cat. It's completely different. And the quality of that cat is, he really is just kind of not going to do anything. But if you tell him to do something, then nothing will stop him. And I thought there was a quality of me in that. And I saw that cat and I thought, I like that, because all the other ones were like, here's a bunch, pick.
Right.
So we sent in 25 and 25.50, and they picked that cat. And then I cast the voice, and the voice was a guy who had worked with me before, and I gave him like 6 different directions. But what I wanted to do, there used to be a program, TV show called Treasury Agent, and I wanted the announcer to sort of charge the cat with being like a criminal. So this really deep voice said, "You, sir, are a cat, and you would do anything to get your paws on some salmon." Hysterical, because it's the wrong, it's not just, it's not, it's challenging him. And I liked it. And we did 3, and then the I didn't know, but it was a fishing company, a New England fishing company, that took their byproduct and made cat food,
Oh,
and they would go into a market and sell out. And it seemed that the fish, the canned kitty salmon, was so rich that it made cats choke. And if they didn't choke, they died. I didn't know that until later. I mean, it was too rich. Eventually, the owner of the company, who was a big fan, ran off with all the money, and that was the end of the campaign. That's the story of Kitty Salmon. But
there you go.
part of it is I have an identity. I draw the cat all the
You
time.
do,
It's sort
yeah,
of,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's there's this innocence that I feel. But again, if I know I'm going to do something, you can't stop me, But
Yeah, yeah.
other than that,
Yeah, no, I've seen your drawings of the cat. Very, very much, Bob. Yeah, the inscrutable Bob the cat. Yeah.
yeah. Now, let me jump. I'm going to
Hence.
tell you one thing. This is about having experience. I got a call. I worked with Wayne Fitzgerald, and he's a very famous film designer. And he called me up and he said, Billy Crystal's doing City Slickers, and he wants some rope tricks, and in the film title. So I went over to the Gene Autry Museum, got a book on rope tricks.
Hmm.
I looked that up, and then I did a bunch of gags dealing with type and rope. And I brought it in and met Billy and Ron Underwood, the director. And at that point, and they all laughed. He said, "Could I have an animated character title?" And I had, and I and Cal Howard, this great gag man, we used to go out in Thousand Oaks to Sunday afternoon to see the cowhands throw their own rodeo, a little kind of little old wired fence, and they had bulls and horses, and their fellow relatives and their women and whatever their girlfriends sat on hoods of cars yelling stuff, and they were thrown around, hit into the ground, and they always said, after being smashed in the ground by a bull, they run out and then they'd say, let him get up, let Roy get up, or Billy Bob, and whatever it was,
Yeah.
and they'd show no pain. So this is that thing about having an experience. So when Billy said to me, could I have a animated character who, in my film, I got up and I did this cowboy doing all these great tricks with a gun, shoots himself in the leg, and then limps off, but he won't show any pain, which is in the film. Billy says, "That's it. I want that."
Yeah.
And that's how the title came.
Because
So back to, if I had not had that experience,
right.
because it just came to me, did it. I made the room laugh, but it comes from having a life.
Personal experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that was one of the things I wanted to mention as well. It's interesting that it's a personal experience, but it's also universal, and that's why everybody
Yes.
identifies with it, right? So find your voice, it's personal, those personal experiences, and yet we all relate to it. We all understand because we're all humans in that, and we get
I
it.
think
We
so.
get it.
I
Yeah.
think so. I think comedy is a way of making it, usually based on truth, and
Hmm.
kind of just sweeten it a little bit so you can take
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
You know, I I don't I don't think my comedy, hopefully, is not a lie. There's a truth in it.
Mhm.
There's that human quality or whatever. What makes us laugh, like Chaplin says, Charlie Chaplin says, playful hurt.
Right.
I don't like, that AB's, candid camera where you watch a father get hit in the balls, 10
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
That's not funny to me. Someone falling off a roof, off to a chair, to it. No, that's not funny to me.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to be hurt, and yet I can do really crazy hurt gags,
Yeah.
but there's no hurt involved.
Yeah. 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 Now, you've done, that's the other part of your work at Kurtz and companies, that you've collaborated with so many filmmakers, not just in, as you say, with City Slickers, but on doing title sequences with so many films. One of the most iconic ones, of course, is the Pink Panther. Pink Panther Strikes Again. How did you come to work on that project? How did you, was it, and creatively, did the directors work with you? Like Billy, you say Billy Crystals, he says, I'd like to see this kind of thing. Or do they leave it to your own devices, or how did you
Well, the
come to work on it?
director, I worked with oh God, I can't think of his name, but what happened, it's really funny. I and one other writer wrote the first year of the Pink Panther shorts, John Dunn, and they sent out to three animation companies, not knowing I had done the Pink Panther.
Mm,
And it's funny. So I decided my presentation was going to be this: the star of everything is the music. Mancini's music
Mancini,
is so
right?
good.
Yeah.
So I decided to do a storyboard and make a post reel with, and I did the gags with whatever, pseudo where the type would fall. But I wrote it, the almost pretty much what it is, and then we cut a rough cut to the music, and I had it done in a week. We're supposed to do it in a week, and it seemed that the two other companies weren't ready.
Mm, mm,
So the producer called me and he said, they're not ready. Um, he said, but when we have the meeting, we're going to have it in a week. Do you have since you're ready, do you have any order you want to be? And of course, I always have an order. I'm either the first or the last.
mm-hmm.
And I said, I'll be first because I wanted to do this where they couldn't come back, because first of all, the companies that were against didn't have a writer. So they're making big elaborate presentations on boards and big things and whatever. I'm coming in with a video, and that's
Yeah.
it. Little
Yeah.
thing, but and I'm one person. The other companies are all 4 to 6 people. So I come in, and oh God, I can't think of his name. He's done a lot of comedies, but he was early in his career. So the director comes.
Blake Edwards?
No, 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 no,
Oh,
no, no. Not for that title.
the Pink Panther. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I could be looked up. Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
He's done something at the museum, and a bunch of, he's a hot director now, but he's the director. So I said, I have a film to show. So we sat cross-legged on the floor next to each other and put it on. He laughed and laughed, and the room was laughing and laughing. And then he said, "Thank you, and we'll let you know." I knew. I
Yeah.
walked out, and there was this crowd there with their big boards and the stuff. And they called me 2 hours later. They just let the other people present, and then they called me, and immediately I had the job. Um, but no, it wasn't Blake Edwards. He was not involved. Um, I think I'm trying to remember if anybody from the original was involved or not. But basically, I got
Yeah.
almost everything but one joke in.
Wow. When, do you,
I had one gag that was the favorite of the studio, and the director didn't understand it. Um, God damn, I wish I could remember his name.
we'll have to look it up. You
So
mentioned
many,
also.
it's so many people I work for.
Oh, I
That's like Spielberg.
know.
It's not.
Yeah, it's a who's who. It's like the world of Bob Kurtz is amazing. Like it's yeah, amazing. The people you've worked with. I was thinking about you did tobacco PSAs, you did commercials, you're doing titles. Is there any of those three that you prefer that you would say I would like to do on this as opposed to that, or was it all good? It was all just creative
Well,
process for
I
you? Is that what?
like I like doing the longer form. I didn't do, I've done a couple things. I worked with Lily Tomlin. That was a joy.
Oh yeah, that's
Uh,
right. Yeah,
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 and of course George Carlin.
yeah.
And David Macaulay, who's who's the author of all those books, and I worked with him. I I liked there was something about when I was doing entertainment as opposed to commercials.
Mm.
My clients are smarter. There's so much um, fear in agencies that I tried to get away with as much as I could. Um, in fact, there's a wonderful artist who I did a film with, Eiko Ishioka, and she's like a legend in Japan, and she worked for Coppola too, but she was an art director for Parco, which is a department store, but more than a department store in Japan. And I was in Japan. I'd just been brought there as Artist of the Year, so I was lecturing all over. So we saw each other again, and she showed me her films, which were wonderful. We got together for dinner, and then she showed me her films. They were great. And then I showed her mine, and she said, "Oh, you took drugs in the '60s like me." And I said, "No." And she said, "Ah." She said, "You're a ninja." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You steal the project from the client without him knowing." And I realized that's what I tried to do. Most of my commercial work that I did I was out to educate people about animation. And I worked mainly a lot with agencies or people or clients who never worked in animation. And I told them that they had a lot of checkpoints, at the beginning and a pencil test, and they had more control than they had in live. And when I worked with people that hadn't worked before, they had no expectations of they kind of wanted it, but they didn't know what they wanted. Somehow they went there because live action wasn't doing it for them.
Mm.
And so I would get a freedom to work to do more interesting things with people who hadn't done animation. And then, of course, they'd say the big question was, "Has this been done before?" And I always said yes, and of course it was no.
But working with these big names, like you said, George Carlin, Lily Tomlin, and such, and comedy, which you love, and to
Yeah.
put visuals to their words would have been just, I could imagine, would have been a joy, a pleasure. I would have,
Oh,
yeah.
when same, Billy Crystal, whatever. When
Really
you're
curious. Yeah,
working
yeah,
with funny people, Stan
right.
Freberg, whatever, and you make them laugh,
Yeah,
you feel like you belong,
yeah. Part of the club. Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to make a client laugh, uh, that's not a goal. To make an audience laugh is always my goal.
Right.
But I'm gonna say, you're in fast company
Yeah.
if you're with them. I mean, these are legends, and we could talk to each other. Um, oh, it's wonderful,
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know,
for sure. Yeah.
because I'm not a performer, so working with some of the greats, wow, and getting to direct people and voice most of if you do show my some of my films, um I cast the voice in the majority of it,
Mm.
and work with the musicians, and I try to do as much on the film as possible. Where some other films, they're given a music track or somebody else does this, and they do the animation, somebody else does it. You know,
Yeah.
uh, uh, majority of the film, I've gotten to be able to be responsible all the way to the end.
Now, since you those days at Schwinnard and such, where you got an A, you have since gone on to get multiple awards.
Yeah,
You mentioned, I mean, Artist of the Year in Japan.
yeah.
You've won Emmys, or an Emmy, at least an Emmy, and Peabody.
Yeah.
How did it feel to be acknowledged by the industry, by your peers? How do you
Oh,
think?
hey, you love it. It's funny. The most important one was the first award you get. You
Yeah,
never had an award, and suddenly you get an award.
yeah,
Whoa,
get
oh
that
boy,
ribbon.
I belong, and whatever. Uh, you like to say, oh, they don't matter, but it, you know,
Well, do you
I
think
don't do it for I've got to say, I don't do it for the awards.
no, but do you think
But
those award, or was there any particular award that maybe shaped your career, or it's like validated it, and you said, okay, I'm doing something really good, and now it helped shape where you're going, and said, I'm going to continue on and doing. Was there anything like that? Was there
I
anything
don't think
significant?
so, because once I started winning awards,
Mm,
I was winning awards.
mm.
In other words, it wasn't just one. They just
It
started. Uh,
was a
I don't
tsunami of
know. I
awards.
mean, I was, our first year in
Yeah,
business as Kurtz Friends. I didn't have awards before that. Um, though I did get a grant from the AFI, to make a film before I ever, I had my company. And that's kind of an award. That's pretty cool.
right.
Um, but they were, oh, I don't know. I'm winning 5, 10, or more awards. Uh, I don't know. It just uh it's a lot. It's like once we started, we won about, I think, 6 or 7 Clios and award in a
Yeah,
row, which
yeah.
meant you could only win one in animation. And we started, winning. Um it sounds, I don't know. I'm looking around. I got awards everywhere.
I
There's
know.
just this place, if I could show you all over. I mean, my studio has it because, just in case I might want to impress somebody.
Yeah,
But it's nice, and yet it's always the work. It
yeah.
really is the work.
Well, you don't want it posthumously either, do you, Bob?
No, 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 no. Yeah, no, 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 no. That's a good one.
Yeah, we wouldn't have
Yeah,
heard about that one.
yeah,
Okay, let's talk about the changes. You've been doing animation for decades. Oh man, so long. So you've seen the animation industry evolve significantly. I mean, the evolution that it took in the 1990s going into from analog to digital. And now, and from 2D, hand drawn to 3D and such. Just thinking, is there a preference that you prefer when
yeah.
you do?
I still like handmade films. I've done some CG, and I know we're getting less and less of having people who can really animate. But there's something, the more the AI comes in,
Yeah.
you know, if you notice the major animation studios, they tend to look alike because
Yeah.
they're using basically the same equipment.
Yeah.
And so the characters are similar, the flesh tones are similar. Um, there's so much similarity that if you didn't know, you wouldn't know what studio it's from. Um, you have European film that is much more mixed up. You know, there's more and more uh, different visuals. I just watched 50 animated shorts, lots of different styles. You know, it was about 20, 25 years ago when uh, about 60% were CG that were submitted, and a little bit of, collage hand done, no stop motion.
Yeah.
And suddenly, like, stop motion is,
Yeah.
has arisen. This year, there's so many techniques that it's really exciting in the short film.
Oh, I
Uh,
agree. Yeah.
there, and like we always have, like in Japan, you have some great films, but it's fascinating. Even the great Miyazaki doesn't do much redesigning on his characters.
Yeah.
The characters are similar. I still love it in spite of that because I would like a change.
Well, it's his
Uh,
storytelling, isn't it? It's the
yeah,
storytelling
but I
that.
mean, they have long-legged little
Yeah.
girls with long legs and the eyes and the whatever, and yet I would love those films, but they they seem so limited in their design. But they're at least still doing, most of it is 2D,
Yeah.
and there's something uh,
Yeah.
about handmade.
Yeah, and to that point, I agree with you. This past 20, 25 years, all CG films do look alike because, as you say, everybody's using the same rigs, the same technology, the same software. But now, this is why this is why I could never understand. You have a computer, the computer can do any style, right? And now with Spider-Verse, of course, broke it. We have a more graphic style, Teenage Mutant Ninja
Yes,
Turtles, Nimona, even this year with the
wonderful.
Wild Robot, the look of the Wild Robot,
Yes,
so
terrific.
different, right? More conceptual. Well, looks like a concept film than concept art, I should say, concept art than a finished film. So yeah, but technology is changing. Do you find that it affected your work? Did the technology? How did it impact your studio and and what you were doing, or did it just you just went along with the flow?
I don't know. It may have been, and I didn't understand it. I think there's less and less. There was probably about 10 years ago that hand drawn
Yeah.
was old.
Mm.
That's like a passe. We got to move on to the future, and it may have affected me. I don't know, uh, because the combination of making funny films
Yeah.
and making films that look like they were made by humans, uh, it just, you know, I don't know, that market just kind of, closed up.
Yeah, but
Uh,
you also mentioned earlier about having a writer. For example, when you're doing a pitch, the difference with the three studios, yours and the two others, you had a writer with your studio. Do you still have a writer for your?
no, that was me.
Oh, that was you. Okay. Oh, you're the right. Okay,
That's
because
me.
that would
That,
distinctly
that, that,
that
that's
would separate
that's
the men from the
no.
boys.
I don't show up with a writer. I actually I do, but it's me.
Yeah.
Uh, you know,
Because I
uh,
mean, having a writer, because humor in your work is so powerful, and your approach to comedy and animation. And that really makes it effective. It's not just your style of drawing, but it's that which shows the writing as well. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, it's a desperate need to communicate, I think, is always behind it. It's sometimes when I'm watching like the short films this year, some people don't seem to be that interested in communicating to an audience.
Mm.
They're going to get, they're going to get very arty and use those same sounds that you've heard over and over, and
Yeah.
and effects. You know, um, of course, anybody can submit to the academy, so you're going to have a big range of quality. But there were some that were pretty good
Yeah.
and varied.
You worked, of course, in Hollywood, and you're still in Los Angeles, but you've also worked internationally. You mentioned Japan and such,
Yeah.
and your love for Japanese and Japan and all things Japanese. Do you find, how did you find it different for yourself working there? We know the animation culture is quite different from U.S. and Japan, but just internationally overall, how did you find it different when working in them internationally?
Not a whole lot. And
No.
sometimes you have a a translation,
Mm.
slight translation problem. But I mean, like when I was working with on Japanese agencies would come, and of course they come with like 6 or 7 people, and we did a thing for dryers and a campaign for Japan, and at one point, um, there's a girl comes out and she puts up an umbrella, sits down, and starts eating some ice cream.
Mm.
And so Robert Palouse had designed a really nice girl, and they didn't like it, and they said, uh, and they stood up, and one said, "We want more breast. We want more." And they did this. They wanted, meaning they wanted sex.
Right.
So
Sexy.
Pam Cook, who started with me as a student and is an amazing animator, great draftsman, and she draws sexy girls. So I went back. I said, just a moment, and I went back and I said, "Can you draw me a sexy girl?" So she drew me. Like 10 minutes later, I come back with this paper and I show it. They go, "That's it, that's it, that's it." So it was like the it's uh, you know they they were very open and anything. The only thing is you just occasionally you just have to make sure you're understanding.
Yeah.
That goes with any, form.
Communication.
I,
Yeah.
I think you always, first thing that someone needs to do, if you're a filmmaker and you're hired to do something, like if whoever's brought you in, it's not your idea. If they want you to answer a problem they have, you listen to their problem. You really listen to what is their problem, and listen well,
Hmm.
and then try to answer it on your terms,
Mm.
not their terms.
Mm.
I know that's a little more complex, but yeah, how you do it. But by listening, because they're paying for it.
Well, let's talk about that.
And
So, because we're talking about, animation giants, and you were mentored by many animation giants. So,
oh, absolutely.
yeah.
There's
So, okay. So, what advice do you remember from some of those giants that you listened to? Is there anything?
Let's see. Well, that's a good question. I I hear them almost
Mm.
every day.
Mm.
There's something about it. Um, I can Teehee used to um in his pocket, he had lots of little 3x5 cards,
Mm.
and he'd be writing stuff all the time, little. life things to live by. And he was always giving me these little things that, and I have them in a notebook. And something as simple as he wrote on one card, simplify, simplify, simplify.
Mm, mm,
And
mm,
you'd be surprised how well that works, both in life
mm.
and in answering problems.
Yeah. And then drawing. Look
That's one.
yeah.
But they, in every, Mark Davis was this, I mean, amazing draftsman, and he was a very curious human being, and we had great talks, and I'm thinking it was always reaching, trying to do better. And with Cal Howard, he was a gag man, one of the great gag men.
Mm.
And it just, there's like, in certain times, you say things, like in a group,
Yeah.
that you just say it. And later you might be, oh, I wonder if I should have said that. But it's such a um, the fine comedy. I don't. There's just. I just was fortunate. I just.
What
You
about,
know.
let's say I'll pick a say Chuck Jones. Do you have
Yes.
anything you remember? Any thoughts you remember with Chuck Jones?
Well, Chuck was a delight to talk to, and um, towards the end of his career, he was making Roadrunner Coyote
Mm.
shorts at Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
And I had gone to it. It was a really small group of us, like there were 5 people. Um, Went to the Magic Castle. It's a magician's club in LA when he turned 80, and he got a 20-year contract. And his lawyer was there, and his wife and his daughter and son-in-law, and my wife. That was it. So, and I thought there was going to be a lot more people, but Chuck and I had gotten really close. And his daughter came to me and said, Chuck wants to have you, he's getting tired. He wants you to take over directing for him.
Mm.
Would you direct 5 films, 5 Roadrunner Coyote films? And I said, yeah, I would do that, and he would produce it. And it was about a mile from my studio. And somehow I thought I could run my studio, go in, do that thing, like,
Yeah.
whatever the dream. And so the day we signed the contract to do the 5, they closed the studio
Oh.
and they stopped making the films. And
Oh.
I thought, well, so much for 20-year contracts, it's just down it went. But I almost got to work with Chuck. I would have found that, we were good friends, never worked together. We made each other laugh. We had great conversations. Uh, I, you know, someone asked me, what do you wish you had done? It's
Yeah.
always on my film. I have so many film projects I never was able to sell. So it's always one of those, or, would have been interesting. Would I made a funny Roadrunner Coyote,
Mhm.
under Chuck,
Yeah.
you know,
And
uh,
and to work, like you say, it's one thing to be his friend and to sit and chat and share a beer and a dinner with, but to work with him in the same field and do something collaboratively, creatively, that's a whole other aspect to your
yeah,
relationship.
he was such a good friend. He would say, "You want to go out to lunch?"
Yeah.
And then, hey, come by my studio, and he had a limo driver,
Pick you up.
and at the studio supplied him. And I got in the back, and he's sorry for the limo driver. And I said, no, when I grow up, I want one too. you know, and then we go out to lunch in this limo, and it was like, That's like some kind of movie or something, you know.
But now we're talking about these ones that inspired you and you listen to them, but you have mentored and inspired many animators. In fact, I think the first time we met was at the Annie's,
Yeah.
and everybody was talking to you. And I have photos where you're standing there with Pete Doctor, for example.
Oh yeah. He's
Yeah.
he's 6'7".
Yeah.
He used to have a card saying the tallest animator, except now there are other,
Yeah.
Simon Otto
I
six
was just going
seven.
to say Simon Otto. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But you've mentored and inspired so many. So, okay. So people are going to be watching. We have a lot of students watching as well. And they're sitting at the feet of the master, Bob Kurtz. What advice would you give to young directors and young animators that are entering the industry today?
well, again, here we go. Get a life.
Yeah.
Be curious. Um, you know, Einstein stated, curiosity is contagious. Pass it on. Uh, but be curious, question everything. Doesn't mean you're not going to do it, but why this? Why that? Because I believe in the power of a student to teach himself. And when someone says a certain principle, it's not a principle until you try to make it work or try to break the principle. I'll give an example. My co-designer was one of my best students when I was teaching. I was 1 year out of school and they asked me to come back and teach. And I took over Teeh's class. And about 4 years into teaching, Robert Plouffe showed up and he just was so good. So I tried to get him placed in the industry. No one would hire him because he had no experience. So when I started my company, I hired him and he was with me from then on. About 5 years after he's been working with me, doing great stuff. He's just, a wonderful, wonderful artist. And unfortunately, a smoker. And we're outside and he's doing his puff, real man-like, kind of thing, cupping it on, hand under here, or you can't tell, but what.
Yeah.
And he said, when you gave me an assignment, I always tried to prove you wrong. I said, oh, really? He said, yeah. He spoke very short-term words, and I said, could I see some of the assignments? He said, it never worked. I threw them away. But he tested me all the time on the
Mm,
principle, and he'd do one my way and one to prove me wrong.
yeah.
I'd rather have that kind of student. He's not against me.
No.
He wants to find out what really works. And principles, by the way, principles are just things that most of the time work, and you can break them. They're not
I'm
rules.
just
I don't
gonna
believe
say,
in rules. There
sometimes
are no rules.
you have to break things and put it back together to see how it works properly.
Yeah. Can you break a principle?
Yeah.
Now, it's no good to break a principle and you didn't know how to break it.
Mm,
But all principles can be broken, but most of the time they work pretty good. The idea of small, medium to large, in terms of using your shapes, don't do things even, avoid tangents, blah, 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 blah. There's so much stuff. Uh,
yeah.
and the way I talked as a teacher, and Robert, when he was working with me, says, how come you don't talk to me that way?
Mm,
I don't use any of the terminology. And I said, I'm not teaching. We talk about we're making film. We're not teaching. You talk in one terminology. I tried to be as truthful, but he made me aware that there's certain things you say as a teacher that you will never, as a professional, working, you don't need to say it
Yeah,
because everybody else around you knows it.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, I think that's a curiosity, passion, love what you do. Uh, I think, I mean, I'm so fortunate because, God, if I'd been a drill press operator for, you know, 70 years, I'd be a shitty drill press operator. Oh, I would not be a good one.
Oh, no curiosity there. Bob, it has
No.
been a pleasure. This has been
Oh,
just a
thank
wonderful,
you.
wonderful afternoon spent with you. And I know this is probably going to be just part one, because
Okay.
if I get you to just mention some names, mention names, and you probably could go and tell us so
Oh,
many more
I
stories about your life and your career and your legacy, the legacy
oh,
that you
there's so many. I've been so fortunate to work with so many really wonderful talents. Uh, by the way, just in closing, again for your students,
have.
my studio was made of a bunch of talented outcasts.
Yeah.
We don't belong. If you're an artist, you probably don't belong, but you belong with us. You know, uh, I mean, we always felt like we're not the average human being, but it's a great group of people,
Yeah.
and it still is. The camaraderie with fellow artists and fellow animators is wonderful.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Bob. It's been a pleasure
Thank
listening to
you.
your stories and your legacy, and we look forward to hearing more of this in the days ahead. Thanks.
Well, I look at and call me anytime. Again, Keith, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay. And you stay curious. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Bye.